Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's session, the third session of our TESOL Methodology course at SEVAM. As we agreed yesterday, we're recording today's session so you can watch it anytime you want before tomorrow's session. So let's get into it. Begin. As I have said in the previous two sessions, I would like you to remember that the planning we're using here, or the type of planning we're using, is very flexible. And this is, we are showing the agenda like this, as I said before, which means, or the agenda says basically that we already finished the first point in part two yesterday, that was modern approaches in TESOL. And today we will dive into the rest of part two, including active and self-effective learning, strategies for active learning, fostering self-efficacy and lifelong learning, and probably we will reach part three, specifically to the emotional intelligence and social-emotional learning section. For moving forward, as I like to do first, we'll have a very quick recap. I'm gonna go over some of the key terms we have been discussing since the beginning of the course, being the first one, global English or Englishes. Remember, this refers to the fact that nowadays we accept English is a global language, or a language that is spoken in many countries, and that means it has been influenced by many different identities, local cultures, and other languages, depending on the place. And all of them are valid. And this is a situation, as we have discussed, that has to do with welcoming variety, identity, and as it says here, viewing English as a diverse, evolving global resource. This concept is connected to language ownership. We said that no single group owns English. Of course, this is connected to the previous concept. Learners have agency. They have a word in what happens with the language, especially because it becomes, or yes, it reflects, or it ends up reflecting their identities, their cultures, and what they are as individual beings, and of course members of specific cultures. Then another thing I would like to discuss, or another thing, or another idea, is modern approaches in TESOL, and we particularly gave attention to communicative language teaching. Of course, this is not a coincidence. This has to do with the fact that the TESOL field, had or experienced a big transformation after the 70s, after the 80s, with the rise of the communicative language teaching approach that, as we saw, has become a wide term, as we said yesterday, an umbrella term that covers different approaches, practices that concentrate on communication as the core of language learning. Among these, we have three main approaches. We have content-based instruction, CBI. We also have task-based instruction, and we have project-based learning. We had a long conversation on them yesterday, talking about how content-based teachers become curators of content who choose real life materials that are convenient for the process, adapted to the context, adapted to the class. We saw that task-based is a synonym of learning by doing, like learning by solving real life problems, or accomplishing tangible results, if you want. And then we said that project-based learning, PBL, can encompass the other two because it is a longer span of time in which students can experience content-based, task-based, and more than one task, of course. And we also mentioned that this is a favorite of SEVAM, project-based learning. Remember, you are encouraged to try new things, to come up with ideas, and you can ask for collaboration. Uh, you can ask Miguel for collaboration or myself if you have an idea of a project and you are not sure of how to implement it. And next, we have the post method era. This was another big part of yesterday's conversation. We discussed how, also in the 80s, but this is something that gained or became more important in the 2000s, talking about how methods were perceived, or researchers and practitioners started to see methods as a kind of a restriction, especially if practitioners especially assume these methods as a set of rules that had to be followed. And this is where we are today, basically, uh, trying to implement a context-sensitive pedagogy. Um, in other words, this means teachers adapt methods to learners' goals and the specific realities they face in the specific context where these teachers are teaching their students. As I said, we will continue with part two, the continuation, what's next after this recap and after discussing the different aspects of CLT we discussed yesterday. Um, so let's get to it. So today we will dive a little deeper into the student context and needs, okay? We have talked a lot about, let's say, the teacher's perspective, like the knowledge the teacher should have in order to implement this kind of context-sensitive teaching. Um, as we said, of course, when we were talking about the post-method era. I am referring to how challenging a task, an activity, an exercise should be, for example, or on the first hand. That being said, I will ask you to pause the video for a minute and reflect on the question we have on screen now. What makes a learning activity challenging in the right way? Um, think back to your experiences as a student, as a teacher, and consider when an activity has felt either too easy or too hard. And how does that feeling of the activity being too easy or too hard, how does that affect learners and their engagement or their learning process in general? So again, take a moment, pause the video for a moment, and reflect on these questions. So we're talking here, we're paying now attention after discussing, as I said before, the teacher's side of the story with the methods, approaches, the post-method era, and this premise of developing uh, context-sensitive pedagogy. Now we're paying more attention, or now we will start paying more attention in the upcoming points to the student side of the story. Um, so talking about cognitive demand, we're defining it here as the level of thinking a task requires from learners. We're looking at it from three perspectives. Now, first, when we are talking about something that is too easy or something that is basically at the level of knowledge the student already has, or what they already know, as it says here, we're calling it that I or E, okay, with that special symbol we have there. That's the first part. The second part, or the other side of the story, is what happens if the task is too hard. We're going to label, let's say, the difficulty beyond the base level. I repeat what the student already knows. We're going to give it a number, let's say 5. So this is a way to say this is beyond the student's reach, okay? And what we're seeing here is that when a student is facing a task that goes significantly beyond their reach, they're shut down. You can call this shutdown. You can say they disengage from the class, they get frustrated, they look for distractions, whatever you want. The important part is that the process is broken. Then we have a third stage or a third perspective on this, which is what we are calling here effective tasks, again, from the cognitive demand view. So we are taking the E or the I, as I said, as a representation of what the student knows. So what we are looking at here is the I or the E plus one, I plus one. This is a way of representing, or this is the representation, the visual graphic representation of something that is beyond the student's knowledge, but at the same time is something that the student can reach, something the student can get a grasp on, even when they don't know it. So we're going to refer here and in the next slide to Bloom's taxonomy, which I think is something most of you, if not all of you, probably have seen sometime in your life, even in your research activity or kind of project in high school as a senior. That, yes, the same Bloom's taxonomy, because it is important for us as teachers as well. Why? Because it helps us see the type of thinking a task requires. Um, so keep in mind the I plus one, the representation, the graphic or written representation of a task being just right in terms of difficulty. And then we're going to remember the levels of cognitive demand according to Bloom's taxonomy. And you see here we have from left to right, remember, we have understand, apply, analyze, evaluate, and create, which means that remember is the basic. It's at the bottom part if you want to take a look at it as the pyramid, the very famous pyramid we have seen. Following this structure, we know it goes up and having evaluation and beyond evaluation creation, that is the highest level uh, of cognitive demand. And what we are doing here is connecting this to the A plus one and to, of course, teaching a foreign language, in this case, English. Then, this is why talking about making activities, let's say, sufficiently demanding is allowing or will allow us, or something we can accomplish with this is push learners slightly beyond comfort. Because of course, if you already know what the teacher is talking about, you get bored. And this is probably a common discussion. Well, this is for in my case, this is a common discussion I have had with many students who haven't learned anything during high school, even though they have 5 years of English language learning. And I think we even talked a little bit about this in yesterday or during yesterday's session. But one of the things is that every teacher goes back to present simple of verb be. And for many students, that's boring. Even if they haven't really learned the topic, seeing the same information or reading the same information over and over again, unless you really like it, that's boring. Um, so this is why we want to take students a little out of their comfort zone in terms of what they know. Um, so we're asking more about the second thing here to avoid, we are trying to push them out of their comfort zone a little bit. We're requiring them to have meaningful thinking going on there. Then, of course, since we're talking about language learning, we're trying to make them connect language to problem solving, decision making, or creation, because these are the higher levels. Again, talking about Bloom's taxonomy, and also, of course, align this with our teaching goals and context. So it is not just about trying to make tasks more difficult. It has to be something previously justified, analyzed, planned to avoid overwhelming the student, of course. Bloom's taxonomy in EFL, we're going to dive a little deeper here. Remember, we're going from the bottom of the pyramid or the less challenging kind of thinking to the top. So in this case, number one, remember, is not the superior, but the one at the bottom. Um, so remember, in again, sorry, Bloom's taxonomy in EFL, going back to Bloom, We could say that, for example, talking about remembering or tasks that involve or require remembering, that is recalling facts, vocabulary, rules. For example, we have when you ask students to list or to say 5 foods they like, or when they're doing matching exercises, for example, the words with their definitions, and so on. And then a little up there, we have understand. This is when the student can explain ideas, shows comprehension, and of course, this can be seen in different ways. There are a couple of examples we have here include summarizing the main idea of a text. You see, this is also connected to remembering. But what is the difference? That to understand the main idea of a text, you see, I'm already using the verb. You need to reach a certain understanding of the global message to, get the gist, as they say. Then another example would be explain the difference between say and tell. This doesn't require a lot of reflection. It is not just about remembering, all, even though it can happen, of course, that a student learns, uh, memorizes the difference and just um, says the difference when he's required to. But keep in mind that this is something we are already noticing here. There's a difference because maybe the student can tell you, well, the difference is this and this. But when it comes to application, which is the next stage, you see the difference. Like he can tell you, let's say theoretically, what the difference between these two verbs is, but the important part is applying it because, of course, you don't want the student to stand up in a conversation and say, the difference between say and tell is this. Of course, that's not what we want. We want them to use those two verbs appropriately depending on, well, what's happening in the conversation. So I am already I'm already talking about applying. But yes, this is basically it. Using knowledge in new situation, not just as in the previous case when you're matching, listing, you are not really facing anything particularly new. You're just using your memory, the storage system you have in your brain. So you say use the past tense to describe what you did yesterday. So of course you are remembering, but you're remembering the events in your life. We're focusing here on the language and what you're doing with the language. In this case, this is application. When the student says, I went, I had, I ate, that's application. This is not the student telling you these are irregular verbs and in the past they are used like this. No, it's the application part that matters. And you can notice here how we are literally describing an increase in difficulty, in terms of difficulty. And then you have another one, write a short email using the vocabulary from the lesson. You see, you are already remembering, but then you are applying it. You are not just matching it, like again, remembering, okay, this word means this. No, this is using that word in the right way, in the correct way. In number 4, we have analyze, which means breaking information into parts, comparing and categorizing it. This is not a mystery. It has the same meaning as in Spanish. A couple of examples here include compare two characters from the story, group these adjectives into positive and negative categories. And for example, let's say in the in level 6, level 4, and level 7, sorry, um, there are a couple of lessons where they have to do exactly this. And you see, this is not the kind of exercise that is very frequent in initial levels, but in more advanced levels, this is very common for them to categorize words depending on their connotation or their meaning, the meaning they convey. Then you have to evaluate. It means making judgments, defending opinions, and you have a couple of examples. Which solution to this problem is better? And you can notice how here we are, not that the previous levels are not employed uh, in TBL or content-based or project-based learning, but you see that here you are already getting into task-based instruction. Yeah, you see how this basically makes students think, use their brains to find solutions, to agree with an author in a more in a simpler task, let's say. Um, this is something you also see in debates, for instance, um, especially when you know you have this classic thing of putting the person who supports the position, you put it on the other team to make him or her oppose a resolution. And this is just a way to force them, to think and analyze the situation and evaluate the situation in a more objective way. Uh, Exercising objectivity. That's it. That's exactly the thing. And finally, as I said, creating, of course, and this is something that even people who like soccer, like myself, can think of. Like it is easier to destroy something than to build something new or than creating something new. And this is a good example. You see, it doesn't require a lot of thinking for us in this case. But if you go back to the previous slide, and you can tell there is a huge difference between matching a term with its definition and planning a weekend trip with a budget and present it. Those are two completely different things. Probably you are already wondering about, yes, proficiency levels, type of student, and so on. But this is when I said, or this is what I meant when I said before that increasing the or applying this I plus one is not out of nothing. This is the the opposite actually. This is supposed to be the result of you knowing your students, understanding the context, and making choices, basically making decisions. And then finally, you have create a short dialogue using today's grammar and vocabulary, but this is very different. This is not like uh, you know the classic activity in a high school classroom where you sit down and you start writing a dialogue and the typical hello, how are you? Fine, thanks, and you? No, this is about um, pushing them or giving them the space to use their creativity to produce something uh, appropriate to what they were requested. Uh, I can say, as teachers, our real power lies in how we shape thinking, our students' thinking, our own even. But talking about cognitive demand, the questions we ask, the tasks we design, and the level of challenge we create for our learners. This is where our power is, even a simple question. But this is something I have discussed with some colleagues. The superpower we teachers have in asking the right questions. It is as simple as when you ask why. Do we ask why to our students when we are in a discussion? Or we are just happy because they participate and that's it? Um, I don't know. That's basically what we are looking at here, okay? Using cognitive demand appropriately. And you see then that this is an integral part of designing or developing a context-sensitive pedagogy. Moving forward, I would like to ask you to reflect for a moment. Of course, I'm going to give you some prompts, okay? The first one, and the important one is think of a student who rarely participates in the class. What about it? Well, my question for you guys is, what might be happening for this learner? What's happening to him, to her, and what's the situation affecting him? Is there a situation affecting him? Is he just distracted? Um, what do you notice about their behavior, about your students' behavior when they are not participating in class or when this is even a systematic lack of participation? What do you notice about their behavior, their emotions, their engagement in general? Uh, how do you usually respond in situations like this? Once again, I will ask you to take a moment, make a pause here, and reflect on this because I'm completely sure this is something we have all faced sometime, uh, even in the same day or during the same day. What might be happening then to the student who doesn't participate, who doesn't join the class actively? I included here some possible explanations. Of course, there can be way more, but I think these are very common reasons we can see. Um, First, for instance, the student may doubt their ability to succeed, and this is what we call low self-efficacy. Think about the term because we will go back to it very soon. Another possibility is they might fear making mistakes in public. This takes us back to Stephen Krashen. Remember the monitor hypothesis, the affective filter in this particular case, referring to these feelings you get when you are in a certain situation learning the language. For example, speaking in public and you are not really comfortable because you think you will make mistakes or you are not confident with your pronunciation or whatever you want. Another possible reason then is they could be disengaged due to the unclear goals or irrelevant content. This is an interesting point for me because, or to me, because I think that usually teachers oversee or they don't really pay attention actually to the importance of clear goals, clear expectations, clear procedures. And maybe it is just easier for us to say, oh, he was not paying attention, or something like that. And as in other cases, I have spoken about my own process of reflection as a teacher. Now that I've been a teacher for a little more than 10 years, I have noticed that sometimes in the past, you see, I was proud. Oh, the student was very tough. But then I started wondering, but I mean, is it? Well, I mean, it is fair as long as the instructions are clear, as long as the expectations are clear, as long as that's talking about assessment, but as long as the content is what they studied and so on. And one of the points I insist was analyzing, the statements, the instructions in the assessment instruments. So this is just a little bit of my own experience and something for you to consider that maybe students don't really know what they are supposed to do or to say. And then the emotional state, not necessarily because of us or because of the context, uh, but this can be even more general, as in, well, this is a discussion I had with many teachers from, in the education system in Venezuela back then in 2017, 2018, when we had this uh, heavy, tough situation. And I used to ask my colleagues, hey, but what if the student hasn't eaten anything today? And we are saying, oh, you're lazy, you are disconnected, why are you like this, blah blah blah. And I don't know, this is just food for thought, I guess. So since we're asking ourselves what might be happening, and these are only a few possible reasons, we can pause now again and reflect on the other possible reasons. Maybe situations in which you have received the answer from the student. I mean, the student telling you, oh, well, I'm having this situation, or I feel like this today, or I have been feeling like this recently. So the other question for you to reflect is when you notice a student withdrawing, disconnecting, disengaging, how do you help them re-engage? Once again, take a moment, make a pause, and think about it. Possible explanations for the student who was not participating in the class. I mentioned self-efficacy, and I told you it would be discussed in the near future, and here we are, the following slide. What about self-efficacy? It is the learners believe in their ability to succeed at a specific task. Okay, it's a very simple definition. It is a very simple thing, at least if theoretically speaking. Self-efficacy again refers to the learner's idea of being able to succeed, of accomplish their goals and fulfill expectations. This is a concept developed by psychologist Albert Madura. I'm sorry. I guess a couple of you have heard about him. This is a concept developed under or as part of the socio-cognitive view of learning, which means learning happens not only as an internal process. Remember, from a linguistic perspective, we had Noam Chomsky in the 50s and the 60s pushing the idea or proposing the idea that later became super influential. The idea that the human brain is basically like a computer, and we have this universal grammar device that allows us to learn a language. Well, this is very cognitive. This is centered on the process that happened in our brains. Sociocognitive views accept the fact that this is not the only part. I'm sorry, again. Sociocognitive researchers believe that this is one part, and the other part is what the context gives or presents to the learner. Um, so this, if we are talking about self-efficacy being, I believe, a part of the person's mindset, beliefs, uh, this is, of course, closely aligned with humanistic principles, with humanistic psychology as well. We're talking about agency, confidence, growth. Um, and this is something that is actually very important, as you can imagine. I mean, if you have heard about this before, you already had an idea of why this concept of self-efficacy, or even better, why self-efficacy is important in the EFL classroom. But I'm going to give you a couple of reasons here. High self-efficacy, contrary to what we saw in the previous slide, encourages effort, persistence, and resilience. We are not always happy. Students are not always happy, but if they are facing frustration at the moment, but in like deep down, they believe they can accomplish their goals, that is going to help them become resilient learners, to persist and to make, the necessary effort to move forward. Low self-efficacy, on the other hand, leads to avoidance, anxiety, and quick frustration. And yesterday we also mentioned how age can become a factor. So you can imagine, as it always happens with psychology and these kind of conversations and topics, this is very complex because age can be a factor, of course, but also you have personality. In the US, in recent years, there have been a lot of effort put on gender studies because they can also be an influence. So the important part here to remember is that if they have a low uh, belief, or if they don't really believe they can succeed, they probably won't. So it is important to promote self-efficacy in the classroom, or to which I suggest providing clear goals. You probably imagined this after what I said recently, but yes, providing clear goals and procedures, I would say, is very important. Okay, so they know where they are headed to. And scaffolded task. I'm highlighting scaffolded here um, because, again, this is a whole thing. This is an integral procedure. So they can know, or they may know what they are expected, and they know there are some steps, but the activity can still be challenging. And actually, what we are discussing today is we need to make activities challenging, just not too challenging, right? Uh, but they need support, and this is our role here. Remember, we're supposed to be guides, facilitators, mediators. We're not supposed to do things for them, but to give them the scaffold, to give them the specific uh, design, the specifically tailored scaffold support until they are able to do things independently. Then we have another thing. You see, this is humanistic, the human aspect of learning. We should celebrate small successes. It is not just when they present the final product of their project, you say, oh, it was great, guys. No, this is something we need to do consistently, okay? And teach them to do it as well, because maybe you feel like every day you are failing and every now and then you are congratulated. It's for language learning, but I think it is even for life. Um, this connects with giving students constructive, specific feedback. You see, when we're celebrating successes, this is not only like good job. It is better and significantly more effective, according to research, if we're giving feedback on specific things. Okay, like, oh, you did a good job at blank. Oh, it was great when you did blank. Or I love how you have accomplished blank. Like being more specific. Uh, you can consider how that has an impact. Even more if this is an area or a process or even a language target the student has been struggling with. And when you give some recognition, that is even more meaningful by, of course, making it specific. And finally, these very practical, simple suggestions I can tell you to use peer modeling so students see others succeed. And this is connected to something we will discuss later on, which is building a learning community. That's super, super important. Uh, and this is not about creating a competitive atmosphere. Of course, you can have competition, healthy competition, of course, uh, but not creating like a competitive atmosphere where the student feels he has to be better than the other and to feel superior or to humiliate the other and so on. Further about promoting self-efficacy, I have another set of recommendations added to what we have just seen. Okay, we have support learners through structure and choice. Again, we have just discussed the importance of clear goals, expectations, procedures. Also give them choice. Okay, offer choices about topics to discuss in class, about partners, about the format of an activity or of a product, for example. They are uh, uh, submitting sometime like instead of a written essay, give them a chance of, I don't know, presenting their ideas in a debate, um, a video or something like that. Okay, this increases ownership and therefore confidence. Use scaffolding so tasks feel doable, not overwhelming. I already discussed this in the previous slide. Focus on the learning process, not just the final product. And this is another thing we discussed yesterday, right? We said traditional education is about authority receiving what they are asking for, basically. Being You don't care about what's happening before the exam, but only about the exam. We already said this is traditional. This has been overcome for a while. Let's forget about it and focus on the learning process. In the end, the grade is just a number. Next, we have helped students notice their own progress. Remember what I just mentioned about celebrating successes, but giving effective, specific feedback. Well, it includes short reflection moments so they can reflect on their own uh, performance. There you have an example. Maybe even giving them time to ask themselves something like, "What did I learn today?" or "How did I do a good job today?" or something like this. This is very popular, promoting metacognition and self-awareness. Uh, I encourage students to analyze mistakes as information, not failure. I think I have heard somewhere, I think that's a very common reflection, but Every corrected mistake is a step closer to your goal or puts you a step closer to your goal. So mistakes shouldn't be as punishment, but as an opportunity to improve. But again, this is also part of creating, not just building a learning community, but creating a learning, well, I completely missed the word now, creating a philosophy in the classroom to creating an atmosphere, a culture, a learning culture. That is it. Um, Again, specific feedback, but look at the word we are adding here, actionable feedback. So something, a specific feedback, a specific, let's say, correction, but something that helps the student to improve. And this is why it is important to be specific. Like, oh, you did it horribly. Okay, thank you, teacher, but why was it horribly done? When you say, well, do you need to keep an eye on this? Or, you know, the typical American correction, like then first you praise, then you ask a question, and then you give a suggestion, right? That's a very classic way to go. Like, okay, you did great this part of your presentation, for example, but I was wondering if you wanted to say this in this part, uh, and I would recommend you this. That's an example. You can be more direct, of course. The important part is that it is specific uh, and not harsh, okay? Make it uh, actionable, but also, let's say, digestible, if the word even exists. Another one is reduce pressure and build community. I told you we were going to talk about this. Use peer collaboration to lower the fear of performing alone. Um, Normalize mistakes, as I was saying, as part of learning. And yes, give students time to bond. Uh, of course, you are the teacher, you are in charge, you can develop, you can design, you can come up, you can bring your own ideas to the classroom of activities that are useful for them to practice their English, of course, in meaningful ways, but that at the same time help them bond. This is another advantage of project-based learning, right? That they can share responsibilities, they are forced to talk to each other, um, and basically building community. And I think this is something we have all experienced, either as teachers, as students, as whatever you want. When you're in a classroom, you can really tell there is a big difference when there is a uh, tight community and when there it isn't. When there isn't a community, you know, it can happen. For example, at the beginning of a course, and then it's kind of boring. You don't even want to go because you don't know anybody. You feel like uh, everyone else is just minding their own business. It's kind of awkward. Uh, well, it's on us to avoid this kind of situation, right? To build a community. About universal design for learning, the very famous UDL, after talking about all of these inner feelings, all about these uh, topics that are connected to what's happening inside the student, okay? Because this is going to help us bridge what we were discussing with what we are having ahead of us at this point. What is it? Well, Universal Design for Learning is a flexible framework that helps all learners access and show their learning. It supports self-efficacy growth, of course, because it makes students feel the classroom is designed with their needs in mind. It is not just, this is something that we also discussed yesterday. This is the opposite of a teacher who believes in one size fits all. This is the opposite. This is something that makes students believe that their personalities, their particularities, their needs are taken into account by the teacher. Um, this is why, as I said, universal design for learning is an interesting point to discuss right now. So this is basically designing lessons with the idea of giving students access to learning and show their learning as well. um, it has three key principles that I think can help me enhance the kind of explanation I'm trying to give you here. The first one is probably related to what you might have been thinking while I was reading the definition. Multiple means of engagement, multimodality, some people say. This is about offering different ways to spark interest in the student, okay? So instead of every day going over the slides without doing anything different, that's not engaging. We know. So to avoid that kind of boredom or annoyance, uh, we can try to use different things, okay? Incorporate to your slides, because in the end we must use them, but incorporate extra activities, okay? Bring a game to class. Give them a choice. Maybe don't bring a game, bring 2 or 3 games and let them choose. As long as the game helps them build community and practice their English meaningfully, that's perfect. Then we have multiple means of representation. Present content in varied formats. As I said, we are trying to present variety for them to engage. We are also trying to present variety in the way information is presented, as you can see on the slide. And of course, multiple means of action and expression that you can imagine where this goes. And of course, it is also connected with the previous three. In the end, they work together. This, either way, says allow students to show learning in different ways. And again, you can see the connection with my previous comments. This is something I said about presenting instead of a written composition, a debate, recording a video, and so on. From belief to action, creating conditions for participation. We have already spent a couple of hours, maybe more, talking about the teachers, necessary knowledge, the foundations of TESOL. Today we have spent a while talking about the student side of the story. So let's see now. We can say that when students believe they can succeed, high self-efficacy, plus the classroom being designed to support diverse learners, using UDL based on a CLT approach, in our case, or from a post method uh, perspective, students are ready or are supposed to be ready for something essential. What's that about? About active learning, of course. Active learning is the result of students being engaged, students being or students showing high self-efficacy, and of course the result of a student participating in activities that were designed based on their needs, with clear goals, with clear expectations. That's supposed to be the result, okay? But to avoid talking about theory that much at this point, I decided to just give you a list of strategies for this active learning, for this ideal situation we are looking for when we design lessons and when the student is on a right place, talking about self-efficacy. We have the super classic, the think per share. Remember, one of the recommendations before was to put students, to use peer work, because usually if the student is not ready to speak in public, they can talk to another person. And we can have a special pairings when one of them is very talkative or has a higher proficiency and the other is the opposite. So the super famous think per share is, as the name indicates, you assign the task, you let them think, you give them, for example, a discussion prompt. They think, after a while, they talk about a pair, about their ideas, and then they share with the rest. You have the super famous gallery walk. You have your definition there, a very short explanation, concept mapping, problem solving in pairs. Of course, working in pairs is usually a very good idea because of many different reasons. Then you have sentence auction. That's an interesting one if you want to look it up. Role plays and debates are very common practice at SEBAM, actually. Um, and I'm putting them here into the same category because in both cases, learners are supposed to adopt roles or viewpoints. In one of them, roles, and the other one, viewpoints. but in some cases they are combined uh, to simulate real life situations. Uh, I can I just I can just think of an example. Maybe one of the most important projects I have seen at SEVAM, which is the model of the United Nations. You have both. You see, they are role-playing delegations, but they also have debates and have very interesting exchanges of topics that maybe they didn't even know about before the project. These are great to promote fluency, engagement, empathy, and spontaneous language use. We have more strategies for active learning. The jigsaw, I remember this is one I discussed recently with another teacher from San, well, with Javier. Jigsaw readings, for example, when a reading is too long, dividing the reading into parts and giving parts to groups makes it easier. It makes it lighter and promotes communication when groups start exchanging their parts of the reading. And also, as it says there, promotes collaboration, of course, because I don't know, you can explain it to me, but then I do it the other way around. I explained it to you. And also, even accountability, because if you don't read your part, the reading won't be complete. Then you have the carousel, quick writes, interactive notebooks, snowball discussions, which is kind of similar to the think per share. Um, Four corners. This has many uses. The four corners strategy. But again, this is just a list of examples. You can just look for more. Maybe you have your own things you have used that are effective. And this is why I didn't want, again, as I said before, I didn't want to jump into theory discussions here because I think this is more of a practical thing. So if you have yours and it's effective, you can even share it with the rest. I will mention something that is like an undercover goal. Let's say we have at SEMAM, or let's say unofficial instead, lifelong learning. As we have said in previous sessions, a big part of education is uh, building habits, right? And something we have also discussed in the past is the issues we all know we have in the education system in our country. The lack of habits is a big problem we have. So at SEBAN, we have this unofficial goal that is promoting lifelong learning. And so on this slide, very shortly, I will tell you how we believe we are promoting here this and how you can join the rest and, promoting lifelong learning. Uh, so how it is promoted. First, when we build or we help students build this idea of them being able to learn, encouraging self-efficacy. Another way is giving them support. Remember, scaffolding. For example, using UDL. Uh, there is another way we can look at this, but we will talk about this in another session. This is why I just put it there as an example. But in the end, this is allowing them to feel or making them feel they can learn, they can succeed, giving the support, the necessary support to do so, experience success through meaningful tasks, which is active learning, in other words, when they are the protagonist of things that give them the space to use the language meaningfully. Um, and then a fourth aspect that is very, very important is when they are motivated, when they stay motivated, and this happens by making things relevant, by showing progress, and by connecting things to the context and their needs. Um, so uh, finally, we can say that in terms of lifelong learning, our role is to design conditions where learners feel capable, curious, and willing to keep growing beyond the classroom. Okay, I know this word is probably now uh, sounding there. Maybe it is still lingering. And yes, this is where we are moving now. Because even when students have the ability and the support, which is what we have been analyzing up until now, motivation determines whether they choose to participate, persist, and grow. So yes, when I mentioned willingness before, I was talking about motivation. So let's look at what drives motivation in the classroom. We all know motivation is a complex topic. Um, it's a, ironically, it's a super important topic in the classroom. So I'm just gonna keep it in very simple words here. Um, you see, I'm dividing it here into two types of motivation, intrinsic and extrinsic. Um, Probably you all know this, but for the sake of keeping the progress of the program, I can give you, or I'm giving you this definition of intrinsic motivation as something that comes from interest, curiosity, or personal goals. Of course, something that comes from within, that willingness that results from our own interests. Examples in class, maybe this is kind of silly, but students actively participate in a group discussion while sharing personal ideas and opinions. When this happens spontaneously, you can imagine this is intrinsic motivation manifesting itself there. On the other hand, we have extrinsic motivation, the one that comes from external rewards or when the person wants to avoid negative consequences. For example, students participate to earn points, a prize, grades, or to avoid punishments. Especially, you can imagine this was like a central aspect of traditional uh, education, and yes, it truly was. Moving forward, since the topic is complex uh, and has been studied, there is a lot of research. Uh, we are talking about decades and decades of research, of researchers becoming interested in the topic. And I decided to just include these short insights um, divided into four principles. If I remember correctly, this is framed of the self-determination theory. Um, so we have these four principles. The first one is autonomy. What does research say? Well, this self-determination theory, if I remember correctly, comes from the 80s, but as it happened with the post-method era, it became stronger a couple of decades later. Uh, this is an important thing to mention because there is a lot of research backing up uh, the insights you have now on screen. So talking about motivation, autonomy, research says the student tends to be more motivated when they have autonomy, or in other words, when they feel they have a choice and control over what's happening in the classroom. How do you transform this into a practical strategy? Well, there you have it. On the left, on the right, sorry, here. Offer choices in task topics and formats, as we said before. Use student-led projects or inquiry-based learning. So you see nothing new. We're just actually we're building on something we have already discussed when we talked about self-efficacy. That of course, as you can see, self-efficacy is closely connected to motivation. Then we have competence. Motivation increases when learners feel capable and see progress. This is something we also discussed before. And this is why we are going back to scaffolding, constructive specific feedback, and celebrating successes. Relatedness, when the students engage more, students engage more when they feel connected to their peers, to the teacher, to their community, to their context. So, of course, this is related to another topic we have already discussed. We're talking about building classroom community, using collaborative activities, and showing this is super, super important. It sometimes goes unnoticed, but it is part of our job, showing genuine interest in the students' ideas and contributions to the class. And finally, the fourth key principle, according to this theory on motivation, learners are motivated when tasks feel meaningful and connected to real life. This is something we have been analyzing since day one in this course. So what do? You connect content to real life context, use authentic topics and task. Remember CBI, this is the foundation of CBI. And then you said invite a personal reflection. As I said before, at the end of the class or after they finish an important task or an important project, that's even more useful. With motivation, we finished the second part. As a very short recap, just take into consideration, we went from the very general notion of global English or Englishes. We went through modern approaches in TESOL, and we have just spent an hour talking, well, almost an hour, talking about the students' emotional and cognitive particularities. Uh, so where are we moving? Where are we moving now? I'm sorry. We will start talking about responsive and inclusive teaching. If you remember the agenda I showed you at the beginning, uh, maybe you don't. I think I didn't read the whole agenda because, well, I trusted you guys reading everything in the agenda. But the first point to discuss in the third part, in part three, is learning style. So my question for you here is, what do you know about learning styles? This is a little clue I'm giving you. It says this beautiful image uh, shows you visual, auditory, reading and writing, kinesthetic. Um, so learning styles, in case you haven't heard about them, is a theory that suggests that individuals learn best when instruction matches their dominant or preferred sensory modality. And this is why there you have visual, auditory, reading and writing, and kinesthetic. I'm guessing, I imagine that most of you, if not all of you, have heard about this because this has become almost like a cliche. No, I am more of an auditory person. No, this is tough for me because I am a visual person. This is not something that fits me. Um, I'm gonna pause here or ask you to pause here and think back in these kind of situations you have heard, you have lived, either as a teacher or as a student. And this is exactly what we have here now. Uh, in case you don't have a particular experience like this, I'm asking you to think of a student who struggles or who has struggled in your class. And what style do they seem to prefer? And how do you know what style they seem to prefer? Again, take a pause there, make a pause, and then we continue. Hold your thought there, because in this case, this is not something you are going to share with me. Of course, we can't share that right here, right now, but I am not assuming your answers either, okay? That's something for you to consider in the following slides or during the following slides, because I have another question. This time I'm asking you about Howard Gardner's multiple intelligences model, usually shortened with the M and the I. MI. Have you? Haven't you? This is a little clue again, a little hint. You have intrapersonal, interpersonal, musical, bodily kinesthetic, linguistic, logical, so on and so forth. Uh, Intelligence, from this perspective, from Gardner's multiple intelligences model, we consider intelligence as not a single measure, but a spectrum. You see, as you can see in this beautiful picture, a spectrum of human capabilities. Do you ever take them into consideration in your teaching? Did you know about this? So as in the previous slide, I'm asking you here to pause the video um, and ask yourself about this. If you have ever been in a situation when you say, "Oh, I am a great dancer, I am excellent at sports, I am great at sports, um, I have this like natural talent for languages, uh, but I'm horrible with math. I suck. I don't ask me about, addition, subtraction because I'm the worst person ever." And then you say, oh, maybe that's the kind of intelligence I don't have, or the kind of intelligence I haven't developed, actually. Noticed, probably, these two models are very famous, okay? I'm talking about multiple intelligences, the multiple intelligences model. I'm going to show you now what research actually says about them. But first, I want to highlight the fact that learning styles are even those of you, well, I don't know if any of you, but I think a couple of you have taken courses from the Department of State, the open courses offered online that SEBAM always tells teachers to take. I took a couple of them, and the most recent one was in 2022 or 23, and they still use the term. They talk about learning styles, and they develop activities, they develop tasks, lessons on the topic. And talking about multiple intelligence, the multiple intelligences model, I need to highlight as well that Howard Gardner is a highly respected scholar from Harvard. Um, but again, I'm going to tell you now a couple of things about this, because as much as there's people who don't know anything about them, some other people take them very, very seriously. And what about it? Well, first, matching instruction to learning style does not improve learning. Again, this is what what research actually says. Beyond a teacher's particular ideology or philosophy, there is this, I'm telling you, okay, matching instruction to learning styles does not improve learning. Decades of research show no solid evidence that students learn better when instruction matches a preferred modality. Okay, I'm highlighting this on purpose. Okay, and because this tends to have a connection to our own prejudices. Then students do have preferences. Okay, of course they have, but matching to them, this process does not necessarily increase achievement or retention. So this is completing the previous idea. Um, what matters in any case about learning styles is how deeply students process information, not the sensory channel. So, well, let me move on first. Oh, there's a problem here with the animation. Well, who cares, right? Um, then we're talking about multiple intelligences, which is a theory of human capabilities, as the definition said. Okay, this is not a teaching method. This is a theory that describes human capacities. Okay, In other words, Gardner never intended his model to be used as a learning style system. The thing is that throughout the years, these two models have been combined and to give the idea of, okay, based on this model, we can identify these learning styles and therefore we can develop formulas to teach students based on their preferred style. But this wasn't the purpose of the model. Uh, and you know, the thing with learning styles, as you saw before, is not proven to be an actual thing having an actual effect, let's say, on student achievement. Multiple intelligences, the model describes different ways people can be talented, not different ways they must be taught. So you can be a talented dancer and maybe not be so good at math, but that doesn't mean that you cannot become or achieve progress in math, right? And this is, if you consider this, well, we can read the one that jumped before expected, and I is valuable for reminding us that students bring diverse strengths, but it does not prescribe instructional matching. You see, it is something good, something important. It's a great reminder of how diverse learners can be, but it is not a recipe. Okay. Oh, you are like this. This is the way you should approach information or something like this. Okay. So that's basically it. Okay. Let's hope this one doesn't have the same issue with my little screw up with animation, but this is the third part of what research actually says, okay? Effective teaching uses multiple representations for all learners. What does it mean? Presenting information in varied ways supports understanding and memory. So this is not about a learning style, about you having a specific intelligence and not the rest. This is a reminder of what I said before. There are varied ways, okay? And as teachers, we should use those, okay? And this is something we mentioned before in other points when we were discussing other points, because that's true. If not, we are risking, becoming boring and students disengage and so on. This aligns, of course, as I am already saying, with universal design for learning. Remember its principles. Okay, so more than learning styles, we are talking about universal design, about making or presenting information in different formats, allowing students to present their products in using different formats, and not learning styles as such. And then uh, what actually improves learning in this case? Prior knowledge is an important thing when you want to learn something. What do you know about this before we start the discussion? Motivation, as we discussed just a few minutes ago. The cognitive load, of course, you are not supposed to think the student can learn 1,000 concepts in one class, or it can be even just one, not even one, but you can progress uh, as long as it is, as we said, I plus one, which, by the way, that's, I don't know if you remember, we said this yesterday, or maybe I'm imagining, I didn't say it, but that I plus one is Krashen's representation of putting the student with his current knowledge uh, facing a challenge that is achievable. Okay, that's the way to go, as we said earlier in this session, and that's related to cognitive load, making it challenging, demanding, but at the same time achievable, doable for the student. Then something that actually improves learning is opportunities for active processing. Remember, active learning, meaningful tasks, as we have said in different contexts by now, and emotional safety and belonging. Uh, this is very important to keep in mind. So we're jumping here to develop the final important thing I just told you. Emotional safety, this sense of belonging. Um, this is another one of those points I think probably you guys have heard before. Maybe you are more familiar, or maybe you know more than I do. Uh, but emotional intelligence is not part of the original multiple intelligences model by Gardner. As you can see on screen, well, first, a short definition. Emotional intelligence refers to our ability to perceive, understand, manage, and use emotions in ways that support thinking, behavior, and relationships. It was originally defined by Salovey and Mayer in 1990. You see, this was after Bandura and after the pioneers of humanistic uh, psychology. But it was popularized by Daniel Goleman. I remember this famous producer who became a YouTuber. I won't say the name, but he always says that the most important person probably is not, well, at least in music, but I think it applies here, is not who did it first, but who did it better and notably. And in this case, that's Goldman's case, because he took this idea and moved it forward. So Goldman's talks about five domains of emotional intelligence. You have self-awareness, which is recognizing our own emotions and their impact. Emotion regulation, something that is super important in a classroom and in life. Managing emotions constructively, self-motivation, using emotions to drive persistence and effort. This is connected to emotion regulation, of course, channeling your emotions in a healthy way. Empathy, understanding others' feelings and perspectives, and relationship management. This is navigating social interactions effectively. So all of this sounds very, very similar, probably. And as I said, there's a high probability. It is very likely that somebody hears. I'm sorry, somebody here knows more about this than I do, because of course I'm not an expert. And actually, this is an important point we will touch on in a few minutes. But probably because these terms have become more and more frequent due to the situation we're seeing, all over the world, with people living very stressful lives, facing challenges and not knowing how to handle them, and so on and so forth. Of course, we can see that in the classroom uh, with uh, different emotions appearing. We have mentioned many of them today. And how do students manage them? So at this point, we're reaching social emotional learning, which we can say is emotional intelligence in action. Social emotional learning is one of the top, if not the top, concern we have faced in research in our field in recent years. I remember not long ago, I think it was a couple of years ago, the TESOL International Conference uh, uh, was centered on social emotional learning. It was the main topic. Um, why is that? Well, this is something I uh, mentioned in the previous slide. There you have a definition. Social emotional learning is the educational application of emotional intelligence. So this is connected to emotion management, self-awareness, interpersonal relations. Um, so in education, we can concentrate on these issues. It helps students develop the skills to understand and manage emotions. This is why I was leaving you in the previous slide with that question. How do students manage so many emotions that rise amidst a very complex setting? Uh, because remember, everything that happens in society somehow appears in the classroom, emerges in the classroom. So again, talking about social emotional learning, we're talking about students developing an understanding and how to manage their emotions, how students develop the skills to set and achieve personal and academic goals, regardless of the obstacles they might face. So also develop the skills to feel and show empathy for others, something that is very, very significant. And let's say this is a big influence in community building, right? Or over community building. Um, Also, the skills to build and maintain positive relationships. Of course, this is connected to the previous one very closely, and to make responsible, thoughtful decisions. Not because I don't like the teacher or I don't feel comfortable with an activity, I quit the course or I go and complain with the coordinator. And when the coordinator hears the complaint, it's, with all due respect, something very stupid out of just a lack of ability regarding their the way this person handles or manages their emotions. Okay, so you see, I'm already giving you an example of how this shows or is shown, and I'm thinking here, remembering many situations come to my mind of students and even teachers. I already told you in other sessions how I was kind of the bossy, strict, authoritarian teacher. And I said, hey, in some cases, I get carried away while scolding. You see, I'm even talking about scolding a group of students, and that was a big mistake. And it happens because, again, the lack of uh, developed emotional intelligence, let's say. And then again, there you have a nice explanation, or let's say a comment here to keep in mind. Uh, why are we talking about this? And this, why are we talking about this? This answer to this question is also the answer to why is social emotional learning such an important topic in today's TESOL field. Uh, why? Then again, because it has become central education, because emotional well-being directly affects learning. Emotional well-being affects everything, including learning, and not just language learning, any kind of learning, academic learning at least. Students who can manage emotions, collaborate, and navigate social situations are more engaged, more resilient, and more ready to learn, especially in ESL and EFL contexts where communication, identity, and confidence are deeply entangled. I think this is a very clear explanation. And as a bottom line here, we have, keep in mind, students are human beings. They have feelings, they have emotions, they are not far from frustration, from envy, from anxiety. Uh, so just keep that in mind when you are designing your lessons. But be careful, okay? As I said before, I am not an expert on emotional intelligence, on humanistic psychology, or anything. I have my academic background, but that's it. Why am I mentioning this? Because as much as social emotional learning has become important in the classroom, it is not a magic solution for all your problems in the classroom. Okay, and this is why the slide is titled What to Embrace, what is it good for, and what to watch for, what to be careful with. So there is a big risk of ideological overreach. Okay, um, it is not a secret that the biggest contributor to these theories, frameworks, is the United States. And of course, we have a big academic, an important academic and cultural connection with the United States. So this is why we give a lot of attention to what they do in the field. But it is also true that that's a different culture. That's it. Um, so social emotional learning frameworks sometimes embed cultural norms or values that may not align with local educational priorities. Hmm. Community beliefs or socio-cultural context. Okay. So handle with care, basically. This is why I was summarizing it in the previous slide as, in simple words, students are human beings. Keep that in mind. They feel, they have feelings. But be careful, okay? Then another point to keep in mind is that there isn't a lot of research related to social emotional learning and second language acquisition or TESOL, okay? So while social emotional learning supports general well-being, its direct impact on language learning or language proficiency development is still unexplored, especially in multilingual and ESL settings, including ours. So in a few words, there isn't enough research for us to make final decisions, okay, specifically in our field. Uh, then this is what takes me back to what I was saying about I'm not an expert. I know what I know about learning psychology and life and whatever you want. I have the experience I have, but I am not a psychologist. I am not a therapist. And I think most of us are not either. Uh, so be careful because there can be this situation of blurred boundaries with therapy. Some activities that are usually recommended in social emotional learning that, as you noticed, I didn't include any. I'm just talking to you about the philosophy. But just in case, Andres, our teacher at Sebam, has a little knowledge on this if you want to ask him for more specific questions. Or you can ask me tomorrow and we can talk about this on Friday. But the thing is that the philosophy for us is the most important thing now regarding social emotional learning. Then, talking about some specific activities, as it says there, there's a kind of difficult boundary with therapy. Activities such as trauma journaling, conflict resolution role plays, and sharing personal struggles can resemble more of a therapeutic practice than a teaching practice. And this raises, of course, concerns about teacher preparedness, emotional safety, and ethical limits. We are English language instructors. We are not psychologists. It is not part of our role to give therapy and specific guidance to overcome trauma, for example. That's not our job, that's not our responsibility, and there are limits that, well, the limits are very clear, and you can, in this case, ask Miguel. Uh, we shouldn't pass, okay? Take that into account, please. So I just noticed that I make the same mistake, so I'm going to show you this very quickly. Um, where do we stand today? Remember the question at the beginning was like learning styles, multiple intelligences. Where do we stand today? We stand here. We're moving away from labeling students as visual or auditory, okay? That's not good. Labeling in general is negative. So don't try to label them because they seem to have a preference for visual activities or visual resources. Instead, we recognize that learning is complex and dynamic. And as a consequence, our goal is to offer multiple ways for students to engage with content, process ideas, and show understanding. Multimodality, remember, universal design for learners. Flexibility, on the other hand, variety and responsiveness matter more than fixed categories as auditory learner, uh, visual learner. Okay, flexibility, variety, and responsiveness are the recommended practices. So in the end, all of these we're discussing here, especially this one and this one, are what we can say the heart of inclusion and equity in the classroom. So guys, that's it for today. I hope you have enjoyed. I know this is kind of difficult to hear me talking for so long. But anyways, if you have any comments, any questions, please bring them with you tomorrow to our session. And as you see there, Gibson saying, see you tomorrow.